Welcome, listeners, back to another episode of the SDSU podcast live version on this Tuesday night. I'm your host, Andre Haghverdian, joined as always, by my co-host, Paul Garrison. What's going on, Paul?
What's going on, Andre? It's good to catch up with you a little bit before we jumped on here. Lots going on, man. It's such a busy week like every other week, but I'm good. How are you?
I'm good too. I know we did not have a show the last 2 weeks because I was traveling for work, but this week is back to normalcy, and we're getting this cranked out. It's obviously coming off a bye week. The football team is 3-3. We'll talk a little bit basketball towards the end of the show, but we got the first, at least the exhibition game coming up next Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty soon we'll have both football and basketball going, at least until early or late November, early December. So it's exciting times. The football team is 3-3, coming off a 2-game winning streak. We were out in full force in Wyoming. I know that was over a week ago. But the team, has won 2 games in a row at 27-24, fourth quarter comebacks.
Weird scores.
You can make the case that they should have won those games without needing fourth quarter comebacks. But the fact that they fell behind and they answered both times and won those games, I think is a testament, as Sean Lewis keeps saying, the resiliency of the team. And we're at the halfway mark. 6 more games to go. Some really tough games, starting with obviously Washington State this week. But looking back at the first half of the season, what stood out to you? Anything surprised you, disappointed you about the team? What jumps out at you?
There's a lot that jumps out. I think probably the storyline for me is Trey White and the fact that I went on a couple of podcasts asking for previews of San Diego State, and I got the position right. People were asking who's going to be your defensive guy, and I said, well, it's going to be Marlon Lewis, and I said Dominic Oliver is another one, and I got the position correct. I just got the guy wrong. And going into the week 3, Trey White only has a half a sack. Previewing the article that's going to be coming out on Friday, one of the things that I point out is that it's kind of interesting because Trey White has that half a sack in the first 2 games at San Diego State, in Snapdragon. And then the next 3 out of the next game, they're all on the road except for the Hawaii game. And Hawaii, he takes over at the very, very end. And I think that, it was only after 2 really good games. And I think people weren't really sure. Did he just have a couple good games? Is this actually who he is? And that, this upcoming game will be, I think, the first time where fans, I think, are going there with expectations of him, expectations that he can be the All-American that you saw on all of the, mid-season award lists that he was on, including the Associated Press. And so I think, to me, that's the big story of this. And I think next to that is the story of Danny O'Neil. I think you can look at that, and we should, get into all of it into more detail. But I think it kind of can look at it, Danny O'Neil, in 2 ways. I think if you want to add on for an 18-year-old as a true freshman, and you want to kind of give it in that kind of parameters, he's been sensational. He's been really good. He's been like, wow, like I cannot believe a kid can do this who's not even a year removed from high school. Mm-hmm. If you take those tags off and you just say, like, just as a quarterback, not because he's going to get this great experience now and then next year, the year after, he's going to be really good. But you take the for a true freshman, you take he's only 18 away, and you just say, compare him to the other quarterbacks in the conference just this year on how he's played. And honestly, I think he's been average. I think he's been an average quarterback. And I think that seeing how maybe combining those two things and seeing how after 6 weeks as an 18-year-old and as a true freshman, this second half of the season, I'm expecting an uptick. He's grown. I think you've seen his confidence, I mean, you talk about those 2 fourth quarter comebacks. I've been amazed at how well he's played when they've gotten punched in the mouth and fallen behind. It's almost like each time that either Wyoming or Hawaii took the lead, this like different guy showed up. And I think that competitiveness that was always the thing that people talked about him. I think it really showed up there. And if he can find a way to keep that and to grow in the second half, I think it can be pretty exciting. And so I think those are my 2 big storylines that I've followed and been paying attention to moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think Trey White is definitely the storyline of the first half of the season. I mean, I think in the 2021 season when the team had 3 All-Americans, right? Cam Thomas, Dunkel, I forget his first name, William Dunkel, and Matt Ariza, right? They were all local kids, and Trey White is a local kid from Eastlake. So I think that's a really cool story. Obviously, he's got half the season still to go, so a lot can happen, but he's up there. I like the secondary. I like what a lot of the secondary has done. Not just Chris Johnson and Bryce Phillips, but the safeties, Eric Butler, JD Coffey. You got what's his name? LaShawn Staley, who's come in. A lot of new guys that have stepped up. I think you posted a shout out to CJ McGorisk, the safeties coach, first time as a position coach, and those guys are playing well and they're excelling. Very rarely have we talked this year about the secondary getting picked apart in the slot. That was a very recurring theme. If anyone listened to our podcasts of the last 2 or 3 years since we've been doing podcasts, was getting kind of shredded in the slot, and that's not really happening this year. Obviously, it's a different defense. They're using different guys in that slot to cover, but I think that's been a development. I think Marquez Cooper in the running game, the way he started off the season, obviously that Texas A&M Commerce second half was a big second half. He's gotten a lot of yards, but with low average yards per carry. The offensive line injuries, well chronicled there. I think overall in the offense, I expected to see more points, more yards. That hasn't happened yet. I think you can go back and see, Sean Lewis said it usually takes until the 4th or 6th game of year 2 to figure it out. And everyone thought, well, he's just saying that. But maybe it is actually a true statement, because through 6 games, I think their offense is ranked lower than some of the Brady Hoke offenses of the last couple of years were ranked, right? In the 110s or things like that. So, I don't think anybody expected a Sean Lewis offense in 2024 to be ranked almost near the bottom in offensive statistics. So I think that's been surprising. But then again, they're 3-3. They should be 4-2 with some field goals and some end of game, situations at Central Michigan. So they could easily, even despite the struggles offensively, still could be 4-2. So that's kind of my storylines for the season so far.
Yeah, and I like it. And I think that, one of the storylines that we were paying attention before is if you go into the season and you switch coaches and you decide that you're going to abandon what they've been doing for 14 years, there's a real chance that there could be, a significant letdown. And I think, there's still a chance that could happen, right? Obviously. Mm-hmm. But through the first 6 games, I think, if Brady Hoke had been the coach, I don't think that it would have made a big difference either way. I think that they would have been probably better prepared to go into Oregon State, only because I think they would have had a lot of the guys who transferred away in December have stayed. But the drop off in terms of just tenacity, in terms of the way the defense has continued being the strong point of the team, the fact that they are competitive And, the talent level in those games, Central Michigan, Hawaii, Wyoming, like the Aztecs had better talent, I think. And, I think that came across in those games. I think that the Central Michigan, I think played at a higher skill level than San Diego State, but I don't think it was a talent thing. And the fact that you bring in a new coach and it looks like the same level of competitiveness in the same games where you would expect to be competitive, like that's still the case. They haven't regressed so much that they haven't lost something by putting in a new system. So I think that's important. And I think that what you're seeing is not really that unexpected, right? Oregon State isn't as good as Oregon State was against San Diego State, but their system was so perfect to take away everything that Lewis wanted to do, and San Diego State's offense wasn't there yet to be able to do anything about it. What is it that you think needs to transpire, right? From the bye week into the second half of the season for the Aztecs to kind of get to that next level and sneak into a bowl?
I think obviously the offense has to, I feel like they have to pass the ball more because we've talked about the offensive line issues. They've got a lot. Joe Borjan out for the season. Miles Morale, I believe, is out for the season after another surgery. You've got Ryan Silver and Dean Abdullah out off the team and transferring. You don't have many guys. Braden Bryant seems to think that, Sean Lewis seems to think that he's going to be as healthy as he has been since his ankle injury. But I don't know what kind of impact that's going to have on the running game and opening up lanes, especially with some of the schedule that they've got coming up. But I think in order for their offense to take it to the next level, I think they need to open it up passing wise. Whether that's the short stuff, the screen games, the deep games, and I know you asked Coach Lewis about the intermediate stuff, and he basically was like, "We're taking what the defense is giving us, right?" And a lot of smart coaches, a lot of winning coaches say that. Players say that too. We're taking what the defense has given us. But sometimes when that's not enough for your offense to put up the points, sometimes you got to do more. And there's a reason why they're giving you the things that they're giving you too. So it's got to be a balance between what they're giving you and what you're going to take from them. And I think they do need to open it up a little bit more on the passing game wise. And that could be a Jordan Napier, a Jay-Sean Polk. I mean, I think Jay-Sean Polk leads the team in catches, but he's averaging 7.9 yards per catch, which is pretty low, right? You got Lewis Brown, Jordan Napier, they're at over 16, Nate Bennett's over 20. So, Jay-Sean Polk hasn't really shown that he's shown to be a guy who can pick up a short, 3rd and 5 catch, things like that. But guys like Jordan Napier, Lewis Brown, I think need to be more involved, get more targets, and that's really how it's going to open up the passing game, in my opinion.
That's what you need to open up the passing game, or that's going to open up the running game off of that?
Well, that's going to open up the offense.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's really again, this goes back to that original comment about Danny O'Neill, where if you put the caveat that he is a freshman, everything that I'm about to say makes sense. But I think it makes what you're saying harder. Danny O'Neill at this point in his career is really good at running the scripted plays from the sidelines. We've talked to him about some of those deep threats, deep passes and things like that. And those are just the design of the offense. And they're not where he's read, looking this, and then he hits it. It's like, no, my job here is to freeze the safety. I'm throwing here. And that's just what I'm doing. And obviously he's getting the ball there and all of those things. And it's a great time to dial up some of the deep shots. I'm referring more to like the Nate Bennett ones, the double moves on the outside and things like that. And so I think the challenge with what you're suggesting, and this is the growth area, is you're going to need a QB who's able to execute it, who's able to, in a really tight window, be able to say, okay, here is this and this and this. I can't go here, gotta go here, gotta go here, and do that. And to this point, when O'Neal's first read hasn't been there, there hasn't been much after that. And so I think that's the hard part with that prescription. The flip side of it is they're not able to get much in terms of the run game. And for me, I kind of belabor it a little bit in the press conference this week. It's very clear that Danny O'Neal at this point is not able to control a defender in the run game. But every single professional team and the vast majority of teams in college as well, even as prevalent as the read option is, they're not counting on the quarterback to be able to hold a guy. And so I'm just curious, I guess two things. Coach Lewis said that on Monday that it is vital that their QB, whoever that is able to command the C gap. C gap's right outside the tackle, and that's it. Like all you need is somebody who can extend plays with his legs and who can control the C gap. That's all the running that they need their QB to do. They're not expecting it to be like, the Washington State quarterback that you're gonna see this weekend, where he's doing, QB power runs, or the ones from Wyoming doing the same kind of stuff. That's not what they're looking for. They're looking for somebody, play breaks down, he can go do that, and then after that, they're gonna look for somebody who can control one guy in the run game. And I think that if he's not healthy enough to command that, I'm just curious, why you run a read option. Because there's been enough plays where you're handing off and the guy the defensive end who you might think he's going to hold him there completely crashes down on Cooper. And it's as if, it's as if O'Neal is irrelevant. And I think that with the way his leg is, with the way O'Neal's legs, the injury, just the fact that he's young and, when he gets hit, it looks like it takes a toll out of him. I think the defenses right now are saying, show us that you're going to run the ball 10 times. We'll give you 8 yards and we're going to hit you. And we are good with that trade-off. So I think that's the other part of it, is to say, maybe the read option shouldn't be part of the offense right now, because you don't have a QB who's able to do that, but he's doing these other things at a high level. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so I'm just curious about it. And the other side of it is by pounding the run like they've been doing, all of the stuff that they've got in the deep game, which is the only way they've been able to score points offensively. That's why it's there. It's there because everyone's saying Marquez Cooper cannot beat us. And even as to your point, he's still able to get that. So I think that's one piece. The other part,
let me that's, you can't really run that offense and not do the read option. We were kind of talking about this when we were in Wyoming. The spread offense is fairly vanilla, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the caveat that you've got that read option built into each play that can turn into your advantages, right? I think a lot of people look at the spread and think, oh, it's going to be this fast-paced offense that's has all this pre-snap motion and it has all this designs and movement and trickery and misdirection. It's not really that. It's just you spread your guys out. You want to win the numbers game. You've got the read option. You can pass out of it, and I think it's a fairly vanilla offense that works really, really well, especially in the college game when you've got the athletes and you've got the quarterback and you've got the personnel to run it. But when you don't, or maybe you've got the people that aren't experienced in it, you see kind of what San Diego State's going through right now, struggling with it. And the Danny O'Neal thing, he's been in college almost a year now, right? He was an early enrollee. He started 5 games. At this point, saying he's a true freshman and he's inexperienced kind of has to be thrown out the door. If he's your starter.
Wow. After 9 months?
Yes.
Only 9 months. The kid has been on campus 9 months.
I'm not saying he should be held to the standard of a 50-year senior quarterback, but I think at this point, if he's the best quarterback for your offense that Sean Lewis is essentially saying, then he needs to run the whole offense, in my opinion. And if he can't, then you either scrap the game plan and change it, or you start somebody else.
Yeah, and I'm not, they're clearly running the read option, and it's clearly just not something that there was a threat. Now, he did have one run for like 8 yards, and I don't think he got into too much harm with it. He took another read option at the end of the game and got absolutely blown up by a couple of guys on a hit that you just don't want to see him taking. And we've talked a lot about this, but I just think that that it's hard to go and say, let's open up the offense a little bit more, because, as great as his lack of turnovers are, you could also say that that's because where he could potentially get interceptions, he's not even competitive in. Like, he's not attempting to beat guys in windows. He's not attempting to, throw a slant route at 8 yards, 9 yards, 10 yards, where his precision really matters. And so I think that is the growth area. But I will say, the other part that I am thinking about for this Aztec team is they're sitting here at 2-0, and there's 4 teams that are 2-0 in the Mountain West. And, I wrote that they look like pretenders, that if you're beating Wyoming and you're beating Hawaii, you're a pretender. To be legitimate contenders, where you actually would say, you know what, these guys have a puncher's chance of going into Boise on a Friday night and leaving with the win. I think it is Danny O'Neill taking that next evolution as a QB and as a signal caller, and us going and the narrative of, first 6 weeks, this is what he had. But man, did you see him? The student of the game that Danny O'Neill has been described to us, and in every time that we've interviewed him, before, like when he was just committed, or wasn't even committed to San Diego State, was the first time that I talked to him. The kid is impressive. He's cerebral. He's thoughtful of others. And if he was able to sit in this bye week and have all of his own game film, to sit down with Matt Johnson, to sit down with Sean Lewis, and just have that time to really pour over it. I think that, there's a good chance that everything that we're talking about could happen. And then I think that if they're able to do some of that, I think then that complements what it is that they're trying to do with Marcus Cooper. Because, to your point, I think they've been better, the offensive line has, at pass blocking compared to what they've been doing at run blocking. And so like that, I think that's another piece of this. Defensively, what I am paying attention to is they have not really been great against the run. And Washington State is great on the ground. Like, that's what they do better. They've been having some trouble the last 3 weeks, but early part of the season, that's really where, they were special. We obviously know Boise State is special there. Air Force, that's what they do. And I think that I'm really curious to see if they're able, again, with the bye week, to fix some of the issues that they've had. Teams have really been attacking their edge rushers. For as great as Trey White has been, there's been many huge plays where Trey White is at the point of attack and he makes the wrong play, or he gets blown up by somebody and it springs for a long run. And, including, like we talked about, them falling behind at Wyoming. Well, that was them running right at Trey White. And that's a way to neutralize him. Like, if you can't block him, run right at him. I mean, just like, was it Dwight Freeney from Indianapolis way back in the day? Like, that's how teams attack Indianapolis. As they said, if we got into 3rd and long, he's going to be able to beat us. But what we're going to do is we're going to run straight at him. And the fact that the way the system is and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm curious to see if they fix some of those issues, because they've gotten better, but nowhere where you'd go in there going into this game thinking, man, they're going to be able to really stop the Cougars on the ground.
Well, the true test is going to be next Friday against Ashton Genty, the Heisman Trophy
Front
front runner, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Robbie Castillo joining us. He says Lewis has already talked about keeping Trey White into next season. Losing him would hurt, but what a great opportunity we have in recruiting edge rushers if we keep this coaching staff. Yeah, if you listen to our podcast with Eric Schmidt, probably right after the spring, we put it out. We interviewed him during the spring when we put it out right after the spring. He talked about like our recruiting will come based on how our defense performs, our individual performers. And he mentioned edge guys like, hey, if we're out there and we've got edge guys wreaking havoc on the quarterback, we're going to be able to use that in our recruiting. And Trey White is a perfect example to that. 11 sacks, right? Through 6 games. And like, yeah, I think Coach Lewis mentioned it, like, hey, we got to keep him here. I've already heard rumblings about all the talk that's out there about, worrying about what they can do to keep him, keeping the poachers away. So, I mean, that's a legitimate concern. And who knows what Trey White's focused on the season.
Right.
And we're not necessarily going to get too deep into that right now. But, yeah, that's a key way to recruit. And you talked to Jaden Williams, who's the Mission Viejo edge guy. He still leads the country in sacks.
Right.
So he's kind of mirroring Trey White's performance at the high school level. But he's committed to San Diego State. He's probably getting bigger offers now from Power 4 teams that are seeing what he's doing on the field. And so just like trying to keep Trey White here, they got to keep Jaden Williams committed and signed as well. So that's a big piece of it for sure, is seeing the success Trey White can have in this defense and then recruiting edges who see that and go, hey, I could do that too.
You couldn't have said it better. Robbie, his point is perfect. I mean, I talked to Jaden Williams. I stepped away to get a soda in the press box. And then when I came back, I went, hey, I just spoke to Jaden Williams. And so that's when the timing of that worked out, where we were in Wyoming and right before the game started. And, he did say, like, I am receiving other interest. I'm processing that. He said, I still got a little bit of time to figure that out. So he didn't say I'm 100% committed. Like, I'm not listening, anything like that. But then he said, but I can tell you is I love San Diego State. And then, it went from like that conversation to, hey, tell me about Trey White. What does that mean to you? And everything's that. And he goes, you know what it means to me? Everything that they told me about the defense is true. I'm watching him, and what they told me how I was going to be used, I'm watching Trey White get used like that on Saturdays when the Aztecs are playing. And so I think Robbie is 100% correct. Is, and I asked, talking about that interview with Coach Schmidt, I asked him, like, how do you get defensive linemen to show up to San Diego State when, the guys who are 300 pounds and can move, like, they are the most coveted athletes on the field? And what he said was, San Diego State's got a lot to offer. We can recruit. We got to be competitive. We're going to do that. But these guys are smart, and they understand that Trey White entered into this season not on anyone's radar for anything. I mean, coming out of the spring, he was the backup, changing to a linebacker, right? From a linebacker to an edge position. And he goes from that at San Diego State. This is key. At San Diego State, this is not a guy at Georgia who's getting these kind of accolades. This is not somebody this is a guy at San Diego State who was a first-team mid-season All-American at multiple spots. Why? Because he's in one of the few places where that skill set of rushing the quarterback is unbelievably emphasized. Andre said earlier, like, we're not talking about the guys in the slot anymore. And that's because the defense, you can double team those guys. You have somebody over the top and you have somebody inside. The weakness of the defense is what we just talked about, which is the edge rushers and the run game. They're willing to give up potentially big plays in the run game at those levels in order to allow the edge rushers to just go nuts. I was talking with a defensive end, a guy I know is a defensive end in college, and I was like, man, explain how this works. Jaden Williams described the edge rushers as we have freedom, and the guys behind us, they kind of play for us. I'm like, how does that work? How do you build a scheme where the edge rusher can go inside or you can go outside? That's the trick of it. And if you're Jaden Williams, like, it's not an exaggeration to say you come to San Diego State and you're going to be able to be utilized in a way that and showcase yourself in a way that you won't be able to do anywhere else. And to Robbie's point, I think that's already happening. And I think that's a important part that Robbie brings up.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the first 6 games of the season, but the next game,
segue.
Saturday night, we want to bring in a special guest.
There he is.
Johnny Olivieri, our EVT's finest. What's going on, Johnny?
Not much, guys. Just listening to a great show so far.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah, ready for Saturday. Another game at the Snapdragon.
So you wrote the preview, came out this morning.
Yep.
Aztecs are a 14.5-point underdog at home. Homecoming weekend, Saturday night, 7:30 p.m. It's a late one. What do you expect from this game on Saturday night?
Yeah, this was an interesting one to do the preview for. It was kind of tricky when I was thinking of the keys of the game, players to watch, things like that, because there's so many aspects of the game that can affect the outcome Saturday. Their offense, like Paul had mentioned earlier, they had done a great job running in the beginning of the season, running the football. They've lacked on it a little bit, but their quarterback, he's their leading rusher, 533 yards and 8 rushing touchdowns. Wayshawn Parker, he does a great job running the ball when they need to, but they also have explosive receivers, Kyle Williams and Chris Hudson. They both have over 500 yards. Williams has 5 touchdowns and Hudson has 2. So just across the board on offense, they can hurt the Aztecs in a lot of ways, which is why my key to the game was that defense playing as a complete unit, from the rush with Edge White, Marlon Louis, getting pressure on the quarterback, disrupting the run game, to J.D. Coffey, Eric Butler, Bryce Phillips, Chris Johnson, those guys making plays in the secondary. Defensively, the Cougars, they play physical and they're great at forcing turnovers, which the Aztecs on offense, they've done a pretty good job of not turning over the football this season, which is something that Lewis has seemed to be preaching all year. They've have 10 interceptions and 6 forced fumble recoveries this year. A couple talented linebackers, 2 great corners, and Ethan Connor and Tyson Durant. So, I could just go on and on. There's a lot that's going to be going on.
No, I love it. Talk to me a little bit more about their QB, man. You're Eric Schmidt, right? And you get to design the defensive game plan for the Aztecs. What is your first key to stopping? Stopping is the wrong word. You're not stopping this kid. To slowing down one of the best quarterbacks, in college football, and I think probably the best QB that San Diego State's going to face this year.
Yeah, I agree. It's tough because usually the Aztecs have faced some quarterbacks who can run well, but if you can contain them within the pocket, you're able to force some errant throws there. But with this quarterback, you want to do the same thing, obviously, because he's great at rushing the ball. You want to contain him to the pocket, but not only do you want to contain him within the pocket, that's not enough, because then he has great talent out wide that he can throw the ball to. And, he's completing 60% of his passes. He's approaching 2,000 yards passing and 16 touchdowns on the season. So he's a smart quarterback. Lewis said it in his press conference that he makes calculated, smart throws. If I'm Eric Schmidt and I'm game planning, I'm wanting to mix up some blitzes, apply pressure, make him get rid of the ball faster than he would like, and hopefully force some bad decisions. And then in the secondary, I'm preaching to those guys, when you're wrapping these guys up, rip away at that football. We've seen the Aztecs defense being able to do it so far this season, getting interceptions, forcing fumbles. the two corners, Chris Johnson, Bryce Phillips, they're very physical, and Johnson's forced 3 fumbles this year. The linebackers, we found out Tano and Owen will be wearing clubs, so we'll kind of see how that plays into it. But yeah, you want to contain him to the pocket, make sure he can't get any big runs, but at the same time, you want to disrupt his timing and force him to make some throws that he otherwise wouldn't feel comfortable with.
We got to find out what the record is for how many defensive players have played with a club in a season. You had Eric Butler started, Tano, Owen Chambliss. I think Tupu is still wearing a club too.
Yeah.
Am I missing anybody? I want to say there was one other guy at a club at some point.
I think you covered him, man. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was hoping Eric Butler would have been in the post-game press conference after Wyoming.
Sure.
And I really wanted to know whether if he was still wearing the club, if he would have been able to pick off that pass and run it back for a touchdown. I'm curious.
Yeah, no, that's a good call. That's a good call. I when I'm looking at this and with their quarterback, I think what I would try to do is to make him one-dimensional as best you can.
Yeah.
And I think if I'm San Diego State, I'm going to test San Diego State secondary, and I'm going to say, look, you've been our best group, so we're going to put a spy on the QB. We're not going to, give you that extra support when we drop 7, and we're going to make sure that we stop the run, and that's what we're going to do, and we're gonna put the bodies there, and that's going to put our secondary into one-on-one coverage more often than not, or making the right read on the zone, which again gets back into basically one-on-one coverage, and that's where we're going to put the stress, and that's why they're 2 touchdown favorites, because there is doubt that San Diego State can do either of those things against Washington State's offense.
Yeah. Yeah, those playmakers. Lewis also mentioned that on Monday that they have the ability to all of a sudden flip the field, make a big play, and then next thing you know, it wouldn't be. It's not going to be that difficult to go down a couple scores and then be trying to fight your way back.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Does this game give the offense a chance to get the running game going, or is this going to be a game where they're going to have to lean on the passing game? Like, how is Washington State's defense set up to stop either or in that aspect?
Yeah, it's interesting. So their 2 corners, like I mentioned earlier, are very talented. In a game like this where they, on offense, they have the ability to score quickly, you're going to need to rely on the pass, I think, more this week. But the way that their defense is set up, they play fast, they play physical, they're able to get to the quarterback and force those throws that O'Neal has done a good job protecting the football. I think he only has 1 interception and 1 fumble himself this season so far. But I think that this week, I think the team as a whole are going to be tested the most they've been all season, and that's another area. So I think they're going to rely on that run game. We've seen Lewis just, feed Cooper game after game so far this season, but I wouldn't be surprised if they go down a couple scores. Obviously, they're going to have to start airing out the ball, throwing up some of those deep 50-50 balls that the receivers have been able to come down with, more often than not this season.
No, I like it. So you're looking into not just Washington State, but give us like your, this is what needs to happen for the Aztecs to have a winning season, or at least get bowl eligible at 6-6. This is what needs to happen over the last 6 weeks of the season.
Yeah. Obviously, it starts this week, homecoming. There's going to be a lot of energy, a great opponent, and with that comes the opportunity to really build momentum. We've kind of seen that momentum being built so far with 2-0 in conference play. So I think that a win here could be huge for them, especially as they're heading into these final 5 games after this week. Only 2 are at home, so they go to Boise, UNLV, and Utah State. So I think a win here could be huge. And then obviously the rest of the games are conference games. So, I think that what they need to do is come out, show that their offense, this will be a great test for them, that they can, play from behind in certain situations and come out with a win. We've seen that the past 2 weeks, but I think on both sides of the ball that this will be the truest test we've seen, and a great opportunity to, like I said, just build that momentum into the rest of the season. And then from there, just use what they've done so far and the success. If they're able to go out there and have success this Saturday, use that film in the previous 2 weeks and what you've seen earlier in the season and build off of that. There's no more bye weeks. And just buckle up and just be ready to put their heads down and work through the rest of the season.
Yeah, they could be underdogs in their next 5 games.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the beginning of the season, we thought New Mexico was going to be an easy game potentially, but they put up 50 points in 3 straight games.
Yep.
That's
and it's sandwiched against all of these other games, and that which never makes it easy. I mean, there's a chance that San Jose could be beat up a little bit when they go into those games, or have no momentum. To Johnny's point, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, Washington State, they're 14.5-point underdogs. Boise, they're going to be bigger underdogs. New Mexico, we saw at UNLV, they'll be probably big underdogs there. And then Utah State, we'll see how the teams are looking in 5 weeks to see who's going to be favored in that. But going to Logan and November 23rd, and the weather is going to play a factor. And then obviously Air Force at home, they should be favored for that. So it's a brutal stretch.
Yeah.
No, it absolutely is. Johnny, let me ask you this question as you get out of here, man. You've I've really appreciated, I know Andre could say the same, man. I really appreciated the coverage that you provided. Getting to know you this year has been great. What are some of the highlights for you being able to, do the coverage that you do and getting to, cover a team and get to do all that?
Yeah, it's been it's even more fun than I expected. And as a sports fan, I expected it to be pretty dang fun. So, I mean, it's just awesome. It's a much different perspective. I'm used to just sitting at home and listening to the commentators on the game, or just being at the stadium, walking around every once in a while. You miss plays, but it's just it's such a different. And the 3 of us have talked about it. It's such a different outlook that you're watching. You guys have done it for a few years, so you've become used to it. But for me, it's just there's so much more technical things that you're looking at when you're watching a game. And that's the most fun thing for me. I mean, I'm up there. I was telling you, Paul, that one time when I'll be up there watching not only the game, but I have my binoculars. And as guys are going off to the sideline, I'm looking to see where they're going, who they're talking to, what they're doing, who's warming up. So I think that part of it has been the most surprising, because I expected okay, cool, I'm going to sit there, watch, what's on the field going on, but there's so much more behind the scenes. And then just the access, being able to interview these great athletes and great coaches. I mean, it's just been a huge privilege that I'm honored with. EVT, I think today the 10,000th article came out. So, I mean, that's just a testament to how great the experience is, and then how much all of us just enjoy putting in the work to provide this content for people. So, yeah, I'm hoping to do it for a while.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
Johnny, we appreciate you coming on. We will see you on Saturday night for sure, and have a good night.
Yeah, you guys too. I'll see you then.
All right, brother.
All right, that was a lot of football. Do you want to talk a little bit Aztec basketball?
No question, man. I from a coverage perspective, I am more excited about this year than I've ever been. And let me tell you why. There was look, I've covered the team, since the COVID year. I mean, I remember going into, Viejas Arena and then going into the Thomas and Mack for the Mountain West Conference Championship, and literally being one of the 3 people who don't work for the university in the building. I mean, it's still the strangest thing to see the cutouts, the crowd piped in noise, them winning a conference championship against Boise State, and nobody's there, but I'm covering the game, and then just the weird kind of the weird sort of way that it was where, they're right there. I'm, social distance from the other media people and obviously from them in Viejas Arena. But then the post-game press conference happens and we get on our computers and we do Zoom, it was still in that era. And so seeing, the evolution of how Coach Dutcher, goes about it, I think I've always felt a little bit like there was a piece missing to my understanding about what I was seeing and how to evaluate it. And what I mean by that is and Johnny was kind of touching on this, when you decide that you're going to do this role, I think there's a level of objectivity that you have to have. There's a professionalism that you have to have. And I think what that means is you don't get to just say like, oh, they should be doing this, and like talking out of your ass and saying, oh, this is what they should do. And they should run this play, and they should run this play, and they should do this, and they should do this. Like, fans get that privilege. We do not. And so I've never wanted to like go and say, oh, this is the offense that Dutcher should run, or here's how they should do this, or here's how they should do this. I've always wanted to, and then with football as well, I wanted to more be about this is what they say they're aiming at, and then are they hitting that? Are they doing that? And with the way that they build the offense, I didn't feel like there was just a piece that I was missing, and the interviews with JD Luster, especially for the preview articles and being able to kind of work through some of those questions, I think I get it. And so I'm really excited to see like how that shows up in the coverage. And so it's pretty exciting. And then, the team itself is that non-personal long diatribe on that, but the team itself, man, I mean, there's so many new pieces, and anybody who says like, oh, I know how this script's going to end, man, it's crazy, because you just have not seen this at San Diego State in a very long time. What are some of the things, Andre, that you're, thinking about and paying attention to as this thing's getting wrapped up?
Well, I mentioned this to you in Wyoming. Like, I feel like this year's team is kind of has a lower floor than last year's team, meaning they could be worse.
Yeah.
But they have a higher ceiling than last year's team. If that everything comes together, that this team could be better than last year's team. I know last year's team made it to the Sweet 16 and lost to the champion, and if they don't play UConn, maybe they go farther. But I feel like the offensive potential and the versatility that could come from some of these guys that are stepping into new roles could produce a higher ceiling. Now, will that happen? Probably not. But I think the excitement that you were alluding to for this year's team is more of the unknown and the potential, right? You've got, you don't have the stalwarts of the last 3 or 4 years, the Lamont Butler, the Darion Trammell, the Jaden Ledee. Algek Arobe has obviously already been gone for a year. There's a lot of newcomers, a lot of people that we haven't seen on the court, whether in an Aztec uniform or in any uniform. And so you're excited to see what Miles Bird's growth is going to be. We saw it a little bit in limited time last year. The Magoon hype train is in full force on social media, but we got to see it on the court, right? John Rothstein is part of that hype train too himself, from coming to practice, I think, last week. But you got to see it on the court, and until that stuff happens, and we know Dutcher's teams get better as the year goes on, and so it's like, what is this team going to look like in March is, I think, the most exciting piece of this. But you're also a little bit leery that like this team might not gel and might not fit, and might struggle in early stretches and, get off to a rough start. Like, yeah, we were just talking about before we came on camera, the home non-conference schedule is not very good, other than Gonzaga. But they've got some really tough games. Obviously, the NIL tournament in Vegas. You got 3. You could potentially play 3 top 25 teams there, right? You slip up, you have a bad week. That's 3 losses right there. Right, they've got, obviously, I think they play Cal in San Jose, and so like you could get off to a rocky start schedule wise, and then you get into conference play like early December, right? I think Utah State is like December 3rd or something, and so I think in a long-winded way is like the possibilities, the end of the spectrum is pretty high on both ends, like how this team could be, whether it's on the good or the bad end. And I think that's that's kind of exciting too, because you don't really know what to expect there.
Yeah, I have a hard time agreeing with the ceiling part. I agree that they have a low floor. I would flip it around to the other side. There's the things that I would say is like defensively, I think there's a real chance they could take a huge step backwards. And what has made them good the last couple of years has been really good defense. And, it's an interesting contrast talking with JD Luster. They have spent more time on defense this year than offense. And the reason that a lot more, they said, the reason is because we don't have 1,000 plays that you have to learn. Offense is a lot. There's that freedom for them to create and to do those things. I have a hard time seeing who's anywhere in the vicinity of Jaden Ledee, who's anywhere in the vicinity of Matt Bradley, who's anywhere in the vicinity of Nate Mensah, in terms of just that elite level guy. There's a lot of guys on that roster who have been very, very good players that if you were to go and you were to substitute him in, you'd say, okay, this guy can be a rotation guy. But I'm not really sure who who that star is going to be. And we also discussed this, when I'm interviewing the Dave Velasquez, I'm interviewing, JD Luster, they're bringing up Magoon as I'm not asking about Magoon Guath, but they're bringing him up voluntarily, right? Like as if he's their guy and he's the guy who's going to be special. Last year they were doing the same thing, but with Jaden Ledee. And when you have a guy who's been in college that long versus a guy who's just starting out, to make your ceiling be around a guy who's a redshirt freshman, I think that points to what you're saying. Now, if Magoon Guath is a guy who's going to be a one and done, and this is his only year that he's at San Diego State and he's entering the NBA draft because he's going to be a lottery pick next year, then I would agree that there might be a ceiling that's really, really high. But outside of him, man, I think it's just hard to say who that guy is. Does Reese Waters finally get to that level where he's a guy that just everyone can orbit around, where everybody on the other team is going and saying here's what we got to do. And here's the team we got to stop. Here's the guy we got to stop. And then you can build your offense kind of based off of that. I don't know. And then I defensively, it's hard for me to believe with as complicated of a defense as San Diego State runs that, and we saw it with Darian Trammell. We saw it with Matt Bradley. We saw it with guys who were known as being defenders show up at San Diego State, and their first year transferring over, they couldn't play defense because there was too much, and they would sub out Matt Bradley for Adam Seiko at the end of the game because Bradley was just not as good defensively, and they don't have that luxury anymore. They're going to have to roll with these guys on the defensive side. And every other group prior to this, when new guys came in, it took them the second year before they were good at defense. So what does a San Diego State team look like that maybe isn't quite as elite on defense? And what does that do for this whole equation? And so I think that to me is why I wouldn't say going right here that they could be better than last year's team that was ranked in the, that beat all these teams and obviously went to a Sweet 16. But it is college basketball, and I did not think that I had no idea Jaden Ledee would be Jaden Ledee either going into last season. And so you just never know how it's going to turn out. Should we talk about a box score?
About the not so secret scrimmage?
Yeah, not so secret scrimmage. I thought of all the box scores, that I've seen from these not so secret scrimmages, that was maybe the least helpful box score that I've seen. Only because I don't think you can duplicate it and have any success this year. You can't have 24 turnovers, but only hold the team to 7 fast break points and 6 points in the key. Like, they didn't shoot the ball well except for BJ Davis, but you're not counting on BJ Davis going 6 of 7. It's great to know that he has it. It's great to know that that's possible. But, like, is that the guy? Is that the guy who is the star? Who's going to be this guy? Obviously, they weren't playing the other guards. The guys that you're thinking are going to be above BJ Davis. And so I think, the trying to find anything from that box score, I think is pretty challenging. Other than the stylistic changes that JD Luster talked to us about, I think maybe you could see with the volume of 3-point shooting. Although I will say the caveat is every time they've played that game, the volume of 3-point shooting has been higher than in the regular time. But
they only shot 21.
How many total shots though?
44.
It's a high percentage. Almost half your shots came from behind the three.
44. Yeah, that's pretty low.
A number of shots. Yeah, it is. And so what they did because they turned the ball over. I mean, that's going to limit their possessions. And so I think that, like I said, it does show that if you can make some threes, you can kind of be bad in other areas, and it makes up for that, to all of the analytics people saying, a three's better than this and this and this, because you can turn the ball over, but it can kind of keep you in the game in those stretches. But I found it hard to really, grab anything out of it because I think that I just don't think it's replicable. I don't think that you can go and say, that's what we're aiming for. That's the kind of style we want to play. But,
Yeah, I mean, none of these scrimmages mean really anything. I hate to say it, but, like, the outcome of this closed, not so secret scrimmage isn't going to necessarily make or break your season or tell you what your season is going to be, especially if you're missing so many starters. I don't know.
I would say, though, I mean, like, you like that they were on the court with the 22 ranked team in the country.
Yeah. And
they didn't get blown off the court, right? I mean, obviously, if we sit here, we go, oh, man, this is trouble. They may not have the athletes or whatever like that. No, this is a San Diego State. Athletically, this is a team.
I don't think UCLA's team is going to be ranked by the end of the season. Like, I don't think that they're very good.
Okay.
That's just I like Kobe Johnson. I think they have some good players, but I don't think they're the 22nd best team in the country. But as I said, like, I don't think this game necessarily tells you as much. I do like 13 assists on 24 made baskets is pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
They only had 3 blocks.
But they kept them out of the lane. I mean,
they shot 31 threes out of 58 shots, so they shot even more than 50%.
Mm-hmm.
So you could tell this game was probably a lot of people chucking up threes as opposed to trying to get in the lane and who knows, get fouled or take contact or whatever. So it does look like a three-point shooting contest back and forth.
But I will say, going back to that conversation about 5 out, you go 5 out to get 3-pointers and to get shots in the key. How many 3-point shots did they make?
9.
27 points. How many shots? How many baskets do they have in the lane?
They had 26 points in the paint.
So 26, 27. We're at what? 53?
53.
How many free throws did they have?
15 to 20.
That's basically all of their points.
Yeah, 68.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? And that's what the 5 out does. I mean, the 5 out kind of dictates, if you stop our penetration, we're going to kick and we're going to get a 3. If you don't, we're going to get into the key.
You almost wonder what those other 4 points were. Someone made 2 mid-range jumpers probably.
Yeah, that's what that is. And Reese Waters didn't play, so that would be a guy who you'd want to be taking your mid-range stuff. Nick Boyd, I think, has a little bit of that in him. Wayne McKinney, I think his as well, although I think he really can get downhill. So I think I saw that. I'm curious to know, like, who was the guy who was the initiator of the offense? That's a question I'm asking. And, obviously you won it for the whole year, but in that formation, I'm not imagining BJ Davis like having the ball in his hands and pulling up and making 6 out of 7. What I'm imagining is somebody drives and they kick. There's an offensive rebound. They kick it out to him. And this is where he's in the flow of the offense, getting these good 6 of 7. But if that's the case, then he's not running the point and he's the off guard. But who led the team in assists?
Miles Bird.
And so now you have Miles Bird with the ball in his hands. And there's always been this thing, like, is he a point guard? Can he be a point guard? I mean, the first opportunities we had to talk with his dad, that was the whole thing. And he's like, I'm not sure if he can guard the smaller guards, but it could be like deja vu of Jalen Rose with the Fab Five, where, Brian Dutcher's on that staff, where on offense, Miles Bird is the guy with the ball in his hands because he can finish at the rim. He's a great distributor. But then when he goes back on defense, he's covering the 3.
Yeah.
And they just switch and they do it that way. And so I think after saying, like, this box score doesn't have anything, it might have teased that. It might have teased that possibility that we're going to see Miles Bird with the ball in his hand. Or it could have just said, like, you didn't have your 3 guards, so he's 4th. It could mean that too. But I thought the way that it broke it down and the fact that Davis had that great shooting line, I thought that suggested that Bird had the ball in his hands a lot more, which I think elevates his game. I think in a 5-out system, I think a guy like Miles Bird is incredibly exciting as the facilitator, as the guy who's going to be that decision maker. Because I do think that I think he has the ability to get downhill quickly, which is what you need while the defense is trying to adjust. And then I think he has great vision to be able to find people. And so I think, like, there's an intriguing possibility there. I did also think that obviously Magoon Gawap and Jared Coleman-Jones, that they both started. And you saw that they just let Magoon go, which I think is brilliant and smart, played over 30 minutes. I don't care if you have 8 turnovers. You're just going to let this guy play and figure it out because he's too talented. Think that's a great idea. But then, on the bench, they brought in Farrell Compton. They brought in Miles Heide. And so it seemed like they played with 2 bigs a lot. And that's been a storyline that we've talked about for a long time. I mean, even back in the day, when they had a Joshua Tamajic, they had a Nathan Mensah, and they had Tahiro Diabate. So they had enough bodies to, like, play 2 bigs, and they rarely did. I think one time they played 2, and it seemed like, at least for this one scrimmage, but again, with the guys missing, so they probably couldn't play 4, wings. They played those 2. They played those 2 bigs, and it seemed like, there was enough depth behind them that they didn't have to ask the question, well, if Magoon Gawaf gets into foul trouble, do we have to keep Coleman Jones behind him because we won't have another big, or vice versa? You know what I mean? Like, they couldn't bring in Ladie with Mensah because if Mensah got into foul trouble, they didn't have a big. And so they had to keep him as a reserve center. And so I think that's a really, like, you want to go and you want to say that a way that maybe their defense could be better. Like, they're not going to have the stress potentially of having a smaller guy at the 4. And so it's going to make rebounding easier. It's going to make some of that. They might not be able to switch 1 through 5 as frequently, although after Nathan Mensah kind of, brought that into the San Diego State system, you're going to see it. They're going to switch 1 to 5 at some point. And what does that look like? How does that work? I think it is really, and do these bigs, when you only had 1 big who was switching 1 through 5, you could hide a little bit better. And the off ball stuff, you weren't as worried about because you could help. Now you're going to have to get help from another big. And so there's just a lot, man. There's a lot that is happening. And I think there's so much still to even talk about even more with the team. If you were going to like predict your starting lineup based off what you're seeing, everybody's healthy. If you want to say, everyone's healthy, whatever, who is your starting lineup that you think Brian Dutcher is going to go with?
Miles Bird, Nick Boyd, Reese Waters, Magoon. And I'm going back and forth between Miles Heide and Jared Coleman-Jones, but I'm going to go with Miles Heide because he's been there, and we know how much Dutcher loves him. But I think it could be Jared Coleman-Jones. But I'm going to go with Heide.
I like it. I'm gonna go with Magoon Guath. I'm going with Jeremy Coleman-Jones. He's played a lot of minutes. Very seasoned guy. I think Miles Bird's going to start on the bench, and I think that you're going to have Wayne McKinney running the point. I think you're going to have Nick Boyd and Reese Waters as your three guys, and then when they bring in the secondary unit, that's the unit that Miles Bird is going to run the point guard for. So I am not personally convinced yet, and I'm anxious to see it. But Nick Boyd as that on-ball point guard, I'm be curious to see like how true that is, and if the 5-out, really suits what he does. He seems to be more of a pace kind of guy as opposed to a guy who plays with great speed. And so his 3-point shooting is so good that like if you have Reese Waters and you have Nick Boyd and those are your two options on the outside opposite the pick and roll, and then whatever you're getting off of, Jared Coleman-Jones shot 40% from 3 as well last year, and those are your guys, and then you have Magoon and Wayne McKinney as the guys who are in that pick and roll. You can't leave those 3 guys. But I think that if you bring Nick Boyd and you put him into the point guard role, I think you're going to leave Wayne McKinney. And then if you take Wayne McKinney out, I think you're going to leave Miles Bird standing out on the corner, and you're going to say, you have a 30% 3-point rate. Show that you can beat us before we are going to just completely be on you as if, you're the greatest shooter ever. But I think with Reese Waters, with Nick Boyd, with Jared Coleman-Jones, I think those 3 guys as your 3 stretch shooters, I think is elite. And I think that Wayne McKinney has shown that he can score. And if he can, work in that pick and roll with Magoon, and then I think you get into the second unit when you take McKinney out, you bring Miles Bird in, and now that's the guy who runs your pick and roll, and he gets into all that kind of stuff. And then I think that's where you get Miles Heide, and you get in that second unit. And another question is going to be is how many guys do you anticipate Dutcher playing? One, and then who are the guys who at the end of your rotation who might not see time?
Oh, I think Jared Coleman-Jones starts over Heide now that I've thought about it. But I disagree with Miles Bird on the bench. I think he's going to be a starter. I think they play for the 5 that I think is starter. Then you got McKinney, Compton, DeGourville, and Heide on the bench. That's 9. Who am I missing? Kimo Ferrara. I don't think he plays. David Majak, I don't think he probably plays this year. I'm missing 2 guys. I should look at the roster. Let's see.
BJ Davis?
BJ Dave, he's gonna play. So
Now you're at 10.
yeah, I think they start with that 10, but it's possible that DeGorville potentially is that 10th guy and he drops off as the season progresses, and we play that 9.
Yeah, I think that'll be an interesting thing to see whether it's it's a 8.5, right, or a 9.5, right? Because they'll go and like if they play 10, it's DeGorville gets a couple minutes at the beginning of in the first half, and then you don't see him in the second half of games. If they're playing 7.5 guys or 8.5 guys, but I wouldn't be surprised to see a guy like BJ Davis, as great of a thing as he had, not be able to get time as they go forward in this lineup. I could very easily see Farrell Compton in that same role, or Miles Heide. I think those two guys are going to be competing for kind of that final spot and in those minutes. I love Miles, and I thought he's incredibly exciting, and he's all of those things. And this is a guy, as his dad reminded us of, who only played in 15 minutes a game last year. This is far from an established guy, and I think that trying to go and say, where does he fit in this system? I think as a off-ball shooter who's there to just stretch guys and kind of find cutting lanes and things like that. I'm not sure that he's necessarily like the best guy for that. The flip side of it is if he is doing some of that on-ball stuff, then he's competing with guys like BJ Davis, Wayne McKinney, and those guys. So I think there's a lot of competition. It's obviously not that, as Dutcher always says, the players are going to decide how this goes. But I think with what's going to happen is we're talking about offense, but it's going to be the guys who learn the defense. I think they're going to have a long leash at home when they're playing all of these teams that aren't the greatest team, to learn the defense. But I think as you start to get into conference play, the guys who are able to run their system defensively, regardless of what they do on offense, are going to be the guys who are going to play. I think that potentially favors all the guys who are returners. I think that favors Heide. I think that favors Magoon. I think that favors BJ Davis. I think that favors, Miles Bird, because those guys all saw it for the second year, even if they weren't like the main ones running it, they all saw it. And I think that seeing it, being around it, the guys who do have that experience in the system, even though they might not be the most experienced college guys, I think could be what gets those guys on the court, and maybe eats into the minutes of some of the other guys. But it's fascinating because I could see it go all kinds of ways. I could see
I was gonna say the other scholarship guy we didn't mention was DeMarshe Johnson, but I would not expect him to be in the rotation. So those are the 12 scholarship guys.
Right. Unless he obviously, unless he's injured, he didn't play against UCLA. Yeah, no, anyway, so I think it's incredibly fascinating. I think San Marcos and what they're going to do and how they run out the team and who they have in there. I think whoever starts that first game, Dutcher has a tendency that's their starting unit. And until something major takes place to get them out, like that's the team. But then he'll obviously remind everybody, it doesn't really matter who starts, it matters who finishes. And I'll be really curious to see, when they decide to go if they decide to go 4 guards, who are those 4 guards? Is that Miles Bird's spot where he's going to play that stretch 4 that all these guys have, man. So a lot of that kind of stuff, man. So I think it's incredibly exciting.
Yeah, we got a Don DeMars comment here. Congrats on 10,000 articles. Shout out to James, our senior writer, and to all the talented writers that made this milestone possible. Yeah, 10,000 is a lot of articles, and I mean, I think I had I had 352, and I was like 7th on the list. So,
Pick up the pace, bro. What's up?
yeah, man, yeah. My pace is pretty good up until like about 4 months ago.
Unbelievable pace, man.
Yeah.
Unbelievable pace. And like you still do every recap just about. So yeah, your pace is great.
Yeah. All right, guys. That's going to do it for us. Thank you guys for listening. Please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Like this, share it with your friends and family who are Aztec fans and would enjoy listening to this. We will see you guys on Saturday night at Snapdragon Stadium. Have a great night. We'll talk to you guys next time.